The Precision of Weirachal, A Brother's Legacy Part I, The Golden Years. Weirachal had always been the brother everyone pointed to with pride. While I fumbled through community college, changing majors 3 times before settling on something vague like communications, he blazed through his mechanical engineering program at State Technical University with a 3.97 GPA. The only B he ever received was in an elective philosophy course called Ethics in Engineering, which he'd taken on a whim during his junior year. Waste of time, he told me over Christmas break that year, munching on Mom's gingerbread cookies. They spent 6 weeks debating the morality of cost-benefit analysis in safety design. Meanwhile, I could have been learning advanced thermodynamics. Our parents, Dad, a postal worker for 33 years, and Mom, a part-time bookkeeper, didn't fully understand what Weirachal did, but they understood success. And their eldest son reeked of it. At his graduation ceremony, when he walked across that stage to accept his degree, summa cum laude, Mom cried so hard her mascara ran down to her chin. I was 20 then, working at a movie theater, still figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. Weirachal was 23 and already had 3 job offers before graduation. He chose Bronson Automotive, a mid-sized company in the Midwest that specialized in commercial vehicle systems. The salary was decent, but more importantly, they gave him real responsibility immediately. I'm not interested in sitting in a cubicle for 5 years before anyone listens to my ideas, he explained when I asked why he didn't take the bigger paycheck from Ford. At Bronson, I'll be designing actual components by month 3. He was right. By month 2 actually. His first major project was a redesign of the transmission system for Bronson's new line of delivery trucks. The existing design was functional but inefficient, fuel consumption was higher than competitors, and there were persistent issues with heat dissipation during long hauls. Weirachal spent 6 months modeling, testing, iterating. He'd call me sometimes late at night, voice electric with excitement. I think I've got it, he'd say. If we modify the gear ratio here and add a secondary cooling channel here, we can reduce fuel consumption by nearly 20% without compromising torque. That's great, man, I'd reply, not really understanding but happy to hear him happy. You don't get it, he'd continue, undeterred by my ignorance. 20% across a fleet of 10,000 vehicles over a year. That's millions of dollars in savings. That's thousands of tons of CO2 emissions prevented. This isn't just engineering, it's impact. When Bronson implemented his design in their 2018 truck line, the results exceeded even Weirachal's projections. Fuel efficiency improved by 18.7%, maintenance intervals extended by 40%, and customer satisfaction scores jumped 15 points. The automotive industry press took notice. At 25 years old, my brother was profiled in Commercial Vehicle Engineering Monthly under the headline, Young Innovator Reshapes Transmission Design. Dad bought 15 copies of that magazine. I think he handed them out to everyone at his post office route. The awards started coming after that. The Midwest Society of Mechanical Engineers gave him their Innovation Prize. The National Association of Fleet Management named him Young Engineer of the Year. He was invited to present at conferences in Stuttgart, Detroit, Tokyo. Our parents' living room mantel transformed into a shrine of his achievements. Trophies, plaques, framed certificates, photos of Weirachal shaking hands with industry executives. Your brother just gets how things work, Dad would say whenever someone new visited, gesturing at the display with undisguised pride. Always has. When he was 7, he took apart the lawn mower and put it back together. Ran better than before. I didn't even know what half those parts were called. It was true. Weirachal possessed an almost supernatural intuition for mechanical systems. He could look at an engine, a suspension assembly, a hydraulic press, anything with moving parts, and intuitively understand not just how it worked but where its weaknesses were, how it could fail, how it could be better. He saw stress fractures before they appeared. He predicted wear patterns before they developed. He understood the secret language machines spoke to each other through vibration and heat and friction. I once asked him how he did it. We were at a family barbecue and he was fixing Uncle Jerry's riding mower, which had been sputtering and dying randomly for weeks. Weirachel had listened to it run for maybe 30 seconds before declaring the carburetor jets were partially clogged and the ignition timing was off by about 5 degrees. "How do you just know that?" I asked, handing him a wrench. He paused, considering the question seriously. "I don't know exactly. It's like, when you read a sentence and there's a typo, you see it immediately even though your brain doesn't consciously process every letter, right? That's how machines are for me. When something's wrong, it's just obvious. The sound is off, or the vibration pattern doesn't match what it should be, or the heat distribution is wrong. It's like the machine is screaming, something's broken here, and I'm the only one who speaks the language." He fixed Uncle Jerry's mower in 20 minutes. By the time Weirachel turned 28, Bronson couldn't hold him anymore. He'd grown too big for their pond. The recruiters from major aerospace firms had been circling for months, but it was Helix Aerospace that finally landed him. Helix was a government contractor specializing in deep space exploration vehicles, the kind of equipment that would eventually take humans to Mars and beyond. The offer was extraordinary, nearly triple his Bronson salary, relocation assistance to Colorado, a signing bonus that made my eyes water when he told me the number. But more than the money, it was the challenge that seduced him. "These aren't vehicles that break down and get towed to a shop," he explained over beer at his going-away party. "These are systems that have to function perfectly in environments humans weren't meant to survive. Temperature swings of 500 degrees. Radiation that would kill you in hours. Vacuum conditions where normal materials sublimate. And if something breaks? There's no AAA in lunar orbit. No replacement parts arriving overnight. These components have to work flawlessly for years, maybe decades, with zero maintenance." His eyes shone when he talked about it. This was his Everest. "You're going to do amazing things," I told him, clinking my beer bottle against his. "I'm going to try," he said. Part 2, The Ascent. Weirachel's first year at Helix Aerospace was brutal. The learning curve was nearly vertical. Spacecraft engineering operated under constraints that automotive work never approached. Every gram mattered. Every failure mode had to be anticipated and mitigated. Testing protocols were exhaustive and unforgiving. But he thrived. His intuition for mechanical systems, that almost mystical ability to sense where problems lurked, translated perfectly to aerospace applications. Within 8 months, he'd been promoted to senior design engineer. Within 18 months, he was leading a team of 12 engineers working on propulsion system components for the Artemis program, NASA's ambitious plan to establish a permanent human presence on the moon. I saw less of him during this period. He was consumed by the work, regularly putting in 70-hour weeks. When we did talk, usually on Sunday mornings when I'd call to check in, he sounded tired but electrified. "We're designing components that will help humans live on another celestial body," he said during one call. "Do you understand how insane that is? How privileged I am to be part of this." "Just don't forget to sleep," I replied, the concerned younger brother. "Sleep is for after we've tested the prototype," he laughed. His specialty at Helix became high-stress mechanical couplings, the joints and connectors that linked critical systems together. These weren't simple bolted connections. These were precisely engineered interfaces that had to maintain perfect seals and structural integrity under extreme conditions while allowing for the thermal expansion and contraction that came with space's temperature extremes. "It's all about understanding tolerances," he tried to explain once. "Too tight and thermal stress causes fractures. Too loose and you get vibration fatigue or seal failure. You're looking for this perfect middle ground where the system has just enough give to handle the environment without compromising structural integrity. It's like tuning a guitar string. Too tight it snaps. Too loose it doesn't make music. But right in the middle you get this perfect note." By age 31, Weirachel was considered one of the top minds in spacecraft mechanical systems. He'd published 7 peer-reviewed papers. He held 3 patents. And he'd been selected as lead designer for one of the most critical components of the Artemis 6 mission, the coupling system that would connect the lunar descent vehicle to the orbital command module. This wasn't just important, it was critical. The coupling had to survive the stress of translunar injection, function perfectly in lunar orbit, and ensure a secure connection when the descent vehicle returned from the surface carrying astronauts back to the command module for the journey home. If it failed, the crew would be stranded. No pressure. I flew out to Colorado to visit him while he was deep in the design phase. His apartment was a mess. Takeout containers stacked on the counter, laundry in various states of clean and dirty scattered around, and his entire dining room table buried under technical drawings, material specifications, and computer printouts of stress analysis models. "Sorry about the chaos," he said, clearing a spot on the couch for me to sit. "I've been a bit focused." "A bit?" I laughed. "Weirachal, there's a pizza box on your coffee table with mold colonies that might qualify for sentience." He glanced at it with mild surprise. "Ah, that's from last week. I should probably deal with that." We ordered fresh pizza, which I insisted on, and spent the evening talking about everything except work. Our parents, Dad's knees were bothering him, Mom had taken up watercolor painting, my job, I'd finally settled into a career in technical writing, ironically enough, his non-existent dating life, who has time, he shrugged. But eventually, inevitably, the conversation circled back to Artemis 6. "This is the big one," he said quietly, staring at his beer bottle. "Everything I've done, everything I've learned, it's all culminating in this. 3 astronauts are going to trust their lives to something I designed. That's heavy." "You're the best at what you do," I said. "If anyone can design something that'll keep them safe, it's you." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes I didn't recognize. Doubt maybe? Fear? It vanished so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, you're right." The design process for the Artemis 6 coupling took 14 months. Weirachal's team modeled every conceivable failure mode, ran thousands of simulations, and built and tested 7 different prototype iterations. The final design was a marvel. A titanium alloy coupling with redundant locking mechanisms, advanced vibration dampening, and a heat shielding system that could handle the thermal stress of space. It was beautiful, really. I saw it once during a family visit Helix arranged for the launch crew families. The component itself was surprisingly compact, about the size of a large dinner plate, but the engineering packed into that space was extraordinary. Every surface, every edge, every internal mechanism had been optimized and tested and verified. "This is probably the most thoroughly analyzed component ever built," the tour guide told us proudly. "It's been tested in thermal vacuum chambers, vibration tables, radiation chambers. It's been subjected to loads far exceeding what it will experience in actual operation. If anything can survive space, this can." The Artemis 6 mission launched on a clear October morning from Kennedy Space Center. Our whole family flew down to watch. Mom, Dad, me, and of course Weirachal, who had VIP access as a principal designer. The shuttle went up like a controlled explosion, a pillar of fire and thunder that shook the ground beneath our feet even from 3 miles away. Mom cried again, but this time from pride mixed with fear. Dad just kept whispering, "That's my boy's work up there. That's my boy's work." Weirachal stood perfectly still, watching the contrail arc across the blue Florida sky until the shuttle disappeared from view. His face was unreadable. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Ask me in 3 weeks when they're safely home," he replied. Part 3: The Fall. The mission went perfectly for the first 18 days. The Artemis 6 crew, Commander Lisa Park, pilot Robert Chin, and mission specialist Yuki Tanaka, completed their translunar injection burn flawlessly. They entered lunar orbit exactly on schedule. The descent vehicle separated cleanly and landed in the Shackleton crater near the Moon's south pole, where they spent 4 days conducting experiments and collecting samples. Weirachal was a ghost during this period. He barely slept, monitoring every telemetry update, every status report. I texted him a few times, but his responses were terse. "All good so far. Nominal performance. Docking sequence starts tomorrow." The docking sequence. This was when the descent vehicle, having launched from the lunar surface, would rendezvous with the command module in orbit and connect via Weirachal's coupling system. Once connected, the crew would transfer back to the command module, jettison the descent vehicle, and begin the journey home. It was supposed to be routine. They'd practiced this maneuver hundreds of times in simulation. I was at work when the news alert appeared on my phone. Breaking. Communication lost with Artemis 6 during lunar docking. My stomach dropped. I called Wirechull immediately. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. Tell me everyone's okay. No response. The news coverage was chaotic and speculative. Initial reports suggested a communication system failure, concerning but not necessarily catastrophic. But as hours passed with no signal restoration, the tone shifted. Something had gone very wrong. I finally got through to Wirechull at 11 p.m. His voice was hollow. The coupling failed, he said. During the docking maneuver, the descent vehicle was approaching the command module and the coupling just shattered. Like glass. Catastrophic structural failure. But the crew? The debris punctured the descent vehicle's pressure hull. They lost cabin pressure. Chin and Tanaka were in the crew compartment. Park was in the docking tunnel. He paused. They had maybe 2 minutes of consciousness before. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. 3 astronauts. Dead. Because of a component failure. Because of Wirechull's component. The investigation that followed was exhaustive, public, and brutal. NASA, the National Transportation Safety Board, congressional committees, everyone wanted answers. How could such a critical component fail so catastrophically? The system had been tested extensively. The design had been peer-reviewed. Multiple safety protocols had been followed. The investigation took 9 months. I watched my brother age years in that time. He participated fully, providing all his design documentation, walking investigators through every decision, every calculation, every test result. He was professional, thorough, and completely shattered. The final report was released on a rainy Tuesday in June. The conclusion: metallurgical defect in the titanium alloy supplied by a subcontractor. The material had passed quality control inspections, but contained microscopic crystallographic irregularities that made it susceptible to stress fracture in the exact conditions it experienced during docking. The thermal cycling in lunar orbit had caused invisible microfractures to propagate until the coupling lost structural integrity at the worst possible moment. The report cleared Wirechull and his team of any design negligence. The failure resulted from a manufacturing defect that was undetectable using standard quality assurance protocols, it stated. The design itself was sound. This was an extraordinarily rare material failure. Dad called me after reading the report, his voice thick with relief. They said it wasn't his fault. Thank God. Wirechull's name is cleared. But when I called Wirechull to tell him I'd read the report, that I was glad the investigation had concluded, he was silent for a long moment. It doesn't matter, he finally said. What do you mean it doesn't matter? They cleared you. It was the supplier's fault, a manufacturing defect you couldn't have. 3 people are dead because of something I designed. That's what matters. Wirechull. I have to go. He hung up. Part 4, The Descent. Wirechull resigned from Helix Aerospace 3 weeks after the investigation report was released. He didn't tell anyone he was planning to quit, just showed up one Monday morning, submitted his resignation letter, cleaned out his desk, and left. Mom was devastated. What is he going to do? Engineering is his whole life. Dad was worried but understanding. Maybe he needs time to process. It was a trauma. I was just scared. Because when I called Wirechull after hearing about the resignation, he sounded different. Lighter almost. But it was the wrong kind of light, like something had burned away and left ash. I'm taking some time to figure things out, he told me. Maybe do some traveling. Clear my head. That sounds good, I said carefully. Where are you thinking of going? I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet. He didn't travel. Instead he disappeared. Not literally, I could reach him by phone and he texted occasionally to let us know he was alive. But he stopped coming to family gatherings. He stopped returning calls from former colleagues. When I asked for his address, he'd moved from Colorado to somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. He said he'd send it when he was settled. 6 months passed. Mom's worry transformed into something harder, hurt maybe that her son had shut her out. Dad tried to be patient, but I could hear the frustration when we talked. "I don't understand," Dad said. He was cleared. The investigation said it wasn't his fault. Why is he punishing himself? Why is he punishing us? I didn't have an answer. Then, 9 months after the Artemis disaster, Weirachel called me. Not a text, an actual phone call, which had become rare. "Hey," I said, surprised. "How are you?" "I got a job," he said. No preamble, no small talk. "Oh, that's good. Doing what?" "Quality control at a manufacturing plant. Checking agricultural equipment before it ships. Making sure everything meets specifications." I tried to process this. Weirachel, who'd designed spacecraft components, who'd been one of the top aerospace engineers in the country, was now doing quality control on farm equipment? "Is that what you want to be doing?" I asked carefully. "It's what I need to be doing," he replied. "I'll send you the address. Maybe you can visit sometime." He did send the address. It was a small town in Oregon I'd never heard of, population 8,700, surrounded by farmland and forest. I looked up the company, Willamette Agricultural Manufacturing Incorporated. They made irrigation systems, grain storage equipment, and tractor attachments. I should have been worried. I was worried. But there was also this tiny, irrational sense of relief that at least he was working, at least he was doing something, at least he hadn't completely fallen apart. I visited 3 months later, driving down from Seattle where I'd relocated for a new job. The town was exactly as I'd imagined. A main street with local shops, a diner, a hardware store, churches from various denominations, pickup trucks outnumbering sedans by about 5 to 1. Weirachel's apartment was above a bookstore on Main Street. It was small but clean, almost monastic in its simplicity. The most striking feature was his workshop, the second bedroom converted entirely into a workspace. But instead of the high-tech equipment and computer modeling systems he'd used at Helix, this room was filled with old things. Disassembled machines covered every surface. A 1960s toaster, its chrome dulled with age, lay in pieces on the main workbench. An ancient mechanical clock, gears and springs carefully organized beside it, occupied another table. A lawn mower from what looked like the 1970s sat partially reassembled in the corner. A vintage sewing machine, a transistor radio, a hand-crank drill, dozens of machines from different eras, all in various states of disassembly. "What is all this?" I asked. Weirachel was making coffee in his tiny kitchen. He looked different, thinner, the expensive haircut grown out, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt instead of the business casual he'd worn at Helix. He looked more like Dad, actually. "Projects," he said simply. "Things I'm fixing. Or trying to understand." "Understanding?" He handed me a mug of coffee and leaned against the counter. "Every machine tells you how it failed. You just have to learn to listen." "That toaster?" "The heating element degraded because the thermostat was miscalibrated from the factory, ran too hot for 50 years until it finally burned out." "The clock?" "Someone overwound it, bent a gear tooth, and it's been running off balance ever since." "The lawn mower had a loose bolt that caused vibration that wore out a bearing that eventually seized the blade." He said all this matter-of-factly, but I could see the obsession in his eyes. "Everything fails," he continued. "Every machine, eventually. And every failure leaves clues. I've been going through everything I can get my hands on, learning to read those clues better." "Weirachel," I said gently, "this is about the coupling, isn't it?" He set down his coffee mug. "I've been going through all my old designs. Everything I touched at Bronson, everything at Helix. Looking for other failures I might have missed. Other disasters that just haven't happened yet." "You can't do that. You'll drive yourself crazy." Maybe I should have done it before 3 people died. We didn't talk much more that day. I tried to convince him to come back to Seattle with me to see a therapist to reconnect with our parents. He deflected every suggestion with polite but firm refusals. "I'm okay," he insisted. "Really? This is just something I need to work through in my own way. I left feeling worse than when I'd arrived. Part 5. The Quiet Years. 2 years passed. In that time, Weirachel slowly rebuilt something resembling a life. He kept his quality control job at Willamette Agricultural, showing up every day to inspect irrigation pipes and grain auger assemblies with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to spacecraft components. His coworkers apparently liked him. Quiet, competent, never caused problems. He developed a reputation in town as the guy who could fix anything. If your washer was making a weird noise, if your car had a mysterious rattle, if your antique grandfather clock stopped keeping time, you brought it to Weirachel. He never charged much, sometimes just asked for the cost of parts. The work seemed to calm him. He also started talking to our parents again. Not frequently, but the wall he'd built started to crack. Mom learned not to push, to accept the small conversations about weather and town gossip in his vegetable garden. He'd taken up gardening apparently. Dad sent him care packages of tools and mechanical parts from estate sales, which Weirachel actually seemed to appreciate. I visited every few months. We'd have dinner at the local diner, take walks through the town, sometimes drive out to the coast to watch the sunset. We didn't talk about Artemis 6. We didn't talk about his old life. We talked about small things, the book he was reading, the hiking trails nearby, my relationship problems. I'd been dating someone who turned out to be allergic to commitment. He seemed better. Not happy exactly, but stable. Functional. Like he'd found a way to carry the weight. You know what I've learned? He said during one of these visits as we sat on a rocky beach watching waves crash against the shore. Failure is the default state of everything. All systems trend toward entropy. Every machine, every structure, every living thing, we're all just temporarily holding chaos at bay. Eventually, entropy wins. That's depressingly nihilistic, I said. He smiled, a real smile. Maybe. But there's something peaceful about accepting it. You stop trying to build the perfect, unbreakable thing. You just try to understand why things break and maybe make them last a little longer. Delay the inevitable rather than trying to prevent it. Is that what you're doing? Delaying the inevitable? I'm doing what I can with what I have, he replied. That's all any of us can do. Our parents visited once, a big deal that required weeks of planning and gentle negotiation. They spent 3 days in Oregon, staying at the town's only bed and breakfast. Mom cried when she saw how Weirachel was living, but she held it together. Dad toured the workshop, examining all the disassembled machines with the fascinated confusion of a man who appreciates mechanical things without quite understanding them. You're happy here? Dad asked Weirachel on their last evening, the 4 of us having dinner at the apartment. Weirachel considered the question seriously. I'm useful here. That's enough. The awards and trophies and framed certificates, the shrine on my parents' mantle, had been quietly packed away sometime during those 2 years. Not thrown out, Mom assured me. Just stored. Nobody mentioned them. Life moved forward as it does. I got promoted at work. Dad retired from the postal service. Mom's watercolors got good enough that she started selling them at local craft fairs. And Weirachel continued his quiet existence in his small Oregon town, fixing broken things and inspecting agricultural equipment and working through whatever demons he carried. It seemed like he'd found his equilibrium, however strange and diminished it might be compared to his former trajectory. Then he called me at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Part 6. The Confession. My phone's ringtone pulled me from sleep, that disorienting moment where you're not sure if it's real or part of a dream. I grabbed it from my nightstand, saw Weirachel's name, and felt my heart rate spike. Nobody calls at 3 a.m. with good news. Hello. My voice came out gravelly. I need to tell you something. Weirachel's voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that's terrifying. About the Artemis component. About what really happened. I sat up fully, now wide awake. What do you mean? The investigation got it wrong. Well, not wrong exactly. Incomplete. Pause. The coupling didn't fail because of a manufacturing defect. It failed because I made it fail. My brain couldn't process what he just said. I don't understand. 6 weeks before the Artemis 6 launch, during final component verification, I was reviewing the microscopy data from the material analysis. We'd done extensive testing, but this was the final check on the actual flight hardware. And I saw something in the crystallography images. The grain structure in one section of the coupling. It was wrong. Subtle, barely noticeable, but wrong. The crystal boundaries showed evidence of irregularities that would make that section susceptible to stress fracture under thermal cycling. He was speaking in his engineer voice, clinical and precise. It was the same defect the investigation eventually identified. But they said it was undetectable using standard protocols. That's not true. It was detectable. I detected it. My hands were shaking. Weirachal, what are you saying? I filed a report recommending we delay the launch and remanufacture the coupling. The launch window was tight. Mars and lunar orbital mechanics wouldn't align right again for another 18 months. A delay would have pushed the entire mission back, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, jeopardized funding. My director, Marcus Hale, he was a 20-year veteran, highly respected. He reviewed my findings and said I was being paranoid. He said the grain irregularities were within acceptable tolerances, that my analysis was overly conservative, that I was seeing problems that didn't exist. But you were right, I said. The coupling did fail exactly how you predicted. I tried to push back. I scheduled a meeting with the program director over Hale's head. But Hale got there first, showed them my report, framed me as a junior engineer getting cold feet, said I didn't have the experience to properly interpret the data. And the program director sided with him. The launch schedule was maintained. My report was noted in the file and essentially ignored. Jesus, Weirachal. So this wasn't your fault at all. You tried to stop it. They overruled you. Let me finish, he said quietly. I could have gone public. Could have leaked my findings to the press, to congressional oversight, to anyone who'd listen. But I didn't. I told myself that maybe Hale was right, maybe I was being overly cautious, maybe my analysis was off. I was 29 years old going against a respected veteran. Who was going to believe me? That's not. So I did nothing. I watched them install my coupling on the Artemis 6 spacecraft. Watched them conduct the final inspections, which of course found nothing because they weren't looking for the specific defect I'd identified. Watched the mission launch. His voice remained eerily steady. And then 18 days later, I watched 3 people die because I didn't push harder, didn't risk my career to stop something I knew was dangerous. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't what I'd expected. This was about professional cowardice, about institutional failure, about a young engineer overruled by the system. That's horrible, I said. But that's not murder, Weirachal. That's not your fault. The system failed. Hale failed. But you tried. I'm not done, he interrupted. A week after they ignored my report, after Hale essentially killed my objection, I went into the clean room during third shift. I had access, I was a lead engineer. Security didn't question me. I went to the coupling component already integrated into the spacecraft, and I made a modification. My blood went cold. There's a non-destructive testing technique using precision ultrasound to map internal stress patterns in materials. It's incredibly accurate but requires specialized equipment and expertise. I used it to identify the exact location of the grain boundary irregularities I detected in the microscopy data. Then I used a medical-grade laser calibrator, the kind used for eye surgery, to introduce microfractures at specific points along those grain boundaries. No, I whispered. The fractures were microscopic, invisible to any standard inspection. They were precise, calculated to propagate under the exact thermal cycling conditions the coupling would experience in lunar orbit. I effectively weaponized the existing material defect, ensured it would fail catastrophically instead of just weakening over time. Why? The word came out strangled. Why would you do that? Because I couldn't let them get away with it. His voice finally cracked just slightly. I couldn't let Hale and the program director and everyone who ignored my warning face no consequences. If the mission succeeded despite my warnings, I'd be labeled as the paranoid engineer who almost cost NASA hundreds of millions. My career would have been over. But more than that, If this mission succeeded, they'd do the same thing on the next mission and the next. They'd keep cutting corners, keep overruling safety concerns, keep gambling with astronauts' lives. So you murdered 3 people to prove a point? I was standing now, pacing my bedroom, feeling like I might throw up. I didn't murder anyone, he said, and there was heat in his voice now. That coupling was going to fail. My report proved it. The investigation confirmed it. All I did was ensure it failed in a way that proved I was right, that my warnings should have been heeded. If I'd done nothing, it might have failed during re-entry instead, or during a different mission, or maybe it would have held together through sheer luck and then failed on Artemis 7, killing a different crew. You can't possibly believe that justifies. I don't expect you to understand. The calm returned to his voice. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness or approval. I'm calling because tomorrow morning I'm turning myself in to the FBI. I wanted you to hear it from me first. They'll arrest me. I'll be charged with multiple counts of murder, sabotage, probably some federal terrorism statutes. The trial will be huge, obviously. I couldn't breathe properly. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of breakdown, a delusion. I've prepared a full written confession, he continued. Documentation of the defect I identified, copies of my original report, detailed technical description of the modifications I made, everything. I've also included analysis showing that Hale and the program director were grossly negligent in overruling my warnings. They'll face consequences too, though probably not criminal charges. Civil liability maybe. End of their careers certainly. Weirachel, don't do this. If what you're saying is true, and I can't believe it is, but if it is, you need a lawyer, you need to think about this, I've had 3 years to think about this, he said. 3 years living with what I did. These past 2 years here, fixing machines, working quality control, that was me trying to understand if I could live with it. And I can't. Not with the secret. Those astronauts' families deserve to know the truth. The system that failed them deserves to be exposed. What about our parents? What about? Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I love them. Tell them. He paused. Tell them I'm still the precision engineer they always said I was. I understand exactly how things break. I always have. Please don't do this. The call will come tomorrow morning. I wanted you to be prepared. I love you, little brother. I'm sorry you have to carry this too. The line went dead. I immediately tried calling back. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I texted, don't do this. Wait. Please. No response. I looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. If he was turning himself in tomorrow morning, I had maybe 5 hours. I started throwing clothes into a bag. Oregon was a 12-hour drive, but if I left now, if I pushed hard, maybe I could get there before. My phone rang. Weirachel. Thank God, I answered. Listen, don't. I need you to listen very carefully, he said, and his voice was different now. Lighter. Almost amused. Because I'm about to tell you the rest of the story. The part one couldn't say until I knew you believed the first part. I froze, one leg in my jeans. What? I didn't sabotage the coupling, he said. That was a lie. Well, not a lie exactly. A test. Part 7, the truth. I sat down heavily on my bed, my brain struggling to catch up. What the hell are you talking about? The Artemis 6 coupling failed exactly as the investigation determined, due to an undetectable manufacturing defect. I did identify grain structure irregularities during final verification. I did file a report recommending delay and remanufacture. And I was overruled by Marcus Hale and the program management. All of that was true. Then why did you just tell me? Because I needed you to understand something. I needed you to feel what I've been feeling for 3 years. His voice was calm, pedagogical almost. When that coupling failed, when those 3 astronauts died, I spent months asking myself, what if I had sabotaged it? What if, in my anger at being overruled, in my certainty that I was right, I had done something to guarantee the failure I predicted? That's insane. Is it? Think about what you felt in the last 15 minutes. The horror. The disgust. But also, be honest, Wasn't there a tiny part of you that understood my logic? That if I'd actually done what I said, there was a terrible rationality to it. I didn't answer because he was right. In the midst of my shock and revulsion, some small part of my brain had followed his reasoning, had seen the twisted logic of it. For 3 years I've been living in that uncertainty, Weirachel continued. Not whether I actually sabotaged the coupling, I know I didn't, but whether I wanted to. Whether some part of me was glad when it failed because it proved I'd been right. Whether my moral calculus is so warped that I could have justified what I just described to you. So this whole thing was what, some kind of psychological experiment on your brother? No. Well, partially. But mostly I needed to say it out loud to someone. Needed to hear how monstrous it sounded. And I needed. He paused. I needed you to still be there on the other end of the line. Needed to know that even if I had done something that horrible, someone would still answer the phone. I was angry now, the adrenaline of the last 15 minutes curdling into something sharper. That's incredibly fucked up, Weirachel. You can't just. I know. I'm sorry. But there's more. The real reason I called. I don't know if I want to hear it. 3 months ago I got a letter. From Marcus Hale. This derailed my anger. Your old director? The one who overruled your report. Yeah. He tracked me down somehow. The letter was an apology. A real one. He said he's been attending therapy since the Artemis disaster, working through his own guilt. And he wanted me to know that he spent the last 3 years reviewing that decision, my report, everything. He said I was right. The grain structure analysis was sound, the risk assessment was accurate, and he overruled me because he was afraid of the political and financial fallout of a delay. Okay. He said he's been advocating for changes to NASA's safety reporting procedures. Pushing for an independent review system where junior engineers can escalate concerns without going through program management. He's testified before congressional committees about the institutional pressures that led to the Artemis disaster. He's basically destroyed his own reputation to try to prevent this from happening again. I could hear something shifting in Weirachel's voice. Something loosening. And then he said something that's been rattling around in my head for 3 months. He said, "You did everything right. You identified the problem, you reported it through proper channels, and you were overruled by people with more power than wisdom. The system failed, not you. But the system is made of people and people can change. I'm trying to change. I hope you can forgive yourself enough to move forward." We sat in silence for a moment, connected across hundreds of miles by a phone line. So I started thinking, Weirachel continued, about moving forward. About what that might look like. And I realized I've been stuck in this purgatory for 3 years, punishing myself for something that wasn't actually my fault. Using the disaster as an excuse to hide from the world, from my family, from myself. You needed time to process a trauma, I said quietly. That's not hiding. Maybe. But 3 years is a long time. And sitting in my workshop night after night, taking apart broken machines, trying to understand every possible failure mode, I think I was trying to reverse engineer my own life. Figure out exactly where the failure occurred so I could fix it, make myself unbreakable. But that's not how people work. No, I agreed. It's not. I've been offered a job, he said. Teaching position at Oregon State University. Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering. They want me to develop a curriculum around failure analysis and safety systems design. Using what happened with Artemis 6 as a case study in how to handle institutional pressure when you identify critical safety issues. Weirachel, that's amazing. I haven't accepted yet. Because it means stepping back into that world. Being public again. Having my name attached to engineering, to aerospace, to the disaster. And I didn't know if I could do that. And now I think I have to try. Because if I don't, then Hale's testimony and NASA's policy changes don't mean anything. The failure has to lead somewhere. The disaster has to teach something. Otherwise, Park and Chen and Tanaka died for nothing. I felt something releasing in my chest. When would you start? January. Beginning of the spring semester. I'd be teaching 2 courses, Advanced Failure Analysis and Engineering Ethics. The irony is not lost on me that the ethics course I blew off in undergrad is now the one I'm most qualified to teach. You're going to be great at it. Maybe. But I'm going to need help. I've been a hermit for 3 years. I'm terrible at email now, I don't have any professional clothes anymore, and I genuinely cannot remember the last time I had a conversation about engineering with another human being that wasn't about fixing someone's washing machine. I'll help, I said immediately. Whatever you need. I want to tell Mom and Dad in person. Was thinking maybe I could come up for Christmas? Actually be there for a holiday for once. They would love that. They'd be so happy, Rachel. Good. That's good. He paused. I'm sorry about the fake confession. It was cruel. But I needed to know what it felt like to be guilty. Really guilty. To carry that weight. And now I know I've been carrying it anyway even though I didn't deserve to. So maybe it's time to put it down. Yeah, I said. I think it is. Thank you for answering the phone. Even at 3 a.m. Even after what I told you. I'm your brother. I'll always answer the phone. After we hung up, I sat in my bedroom as dawn started to lighten the sky outside my window. I was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, still a little angry at Rachel's psychological manipulation. But mostly I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years when I thought about my brother. Oh. Part 8: The Return. Christmas that year was different. Rachel arrived 3 days before Christmas Eve, driving up from Oregon in a used pickup truck he'd bought. Seemed appropriate for my new life as an Oregonian, he joked. When he pulled into our parents' driveway, Mom came out onto the porch, saw him stepping out of the truck, and just stood there with her hand over her mouth. Dad came out behind her, took one look at Rachel, and his whole face transformed. There's my boy, he said quietly. They didn't rush at him or make a scene. They just walked down the steps and hugged him, right there in the driveway, the three of them standing in a tight circle while I watched from the doorway with my eyes burning. That evening, over Mom's pot roast, Rachel told them about the teaching position. About Marcus Hale's letter. About his decision to step back into engineering, not to hide from what had happened but to use it, to teach the next generation of engineers how to navigate the impossible situations he'd faced. I'm proud of you, Dad said, and his voice was thick. Not for being some hotshot aerospace engineer. For being brave enough to fall apart and then brave enough to put yourself back together. Mom just cried and squeezed Rachel's hand. The next few months were a whirlwind. Rachel moved to Corvallis, closer to the university. I helped him apartment hunt over video calls, cheering when he found a 2-bedroom place with a balcony and natural light. The second bedroom became his workshop, but this time it was organized, purposeful. A space for the robotics projects he'd be supervising, not a graveyard of disassembled ghosts. His courses started in January. He was terrified the first week, convinced he'd forgotten how to be around people, how to teach, how to be the person he used to be. But his students loved him. He was honest with them about Artemis 6, about his role, about the institutional failures that led to tragedy. He turned his disaster into their education. I told them about my report being overruled, he told me during one of our weekly calls. About how I was too junior, too afraid of career consequences to push harder. And I told them, don't be me. Don't be the engineer who knew something was wrong and didn't fight hard enough to fix it. Your careers are temporary. Your conscience is permanent. One of his students came to him after class and said, my dad works at Boeing. He's been telling me for years that you have to learn when to keep your head down, when to not make waves. But after your lecture, I'm thinking maybe my dad's wrong. Good, Rachel had told him. Be respectfully, professionally, documentably unwilling to keep your head down when safety is on the line. That's the job. By spring he was publishing again. Not about spacecraft couplings or advanced aerospace systems. About failure analysis pedagogy, about institutional safety culture, about creating environments where junior engineers felt empowered to raise concerns. His paper, The Coupling That Failed, a case study in engineering ethics and institutional responsibility, was published in the Journal of Engineering Education and was assigned reading in engineering ethics courses across the country. Marcus Hale reached out to collaborate. They co-authored an article about what they'd both learned, two men on opposite sides of a terrible decision trying to build something useful from the wreckage. It won an award from the National Society of Professional Engineers. How does it feel? I asked Weirachel when he told me about the award. Working with Hale? Strange. Good though. He's carrying his own weight, you know? We're both trying to make sure Park and Chen and Tanaka's deaths change something. That's as close to redemption as either of us is going to get. In June, NASA invited Weirachel to consult on their new safety reporting and review procedures, the ones Hale had helped develop. He spent 2 weeks in Houston working with current engineers, reviewing protocols, stress testing the new system to make sure it actually protected people who raised concerns. It's not perfect, he told me afterward. No system is. But it's better. If another junior engineer sees what I saw, they'll have multiple independent channels to escalate. They'll have protections. It won't be just their word against the directors. He met someone in September. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Robert Chen from Artemis 6, though Weirachel said the coincidence had made him pause. She was a professor in the materials science department, specializing in metal fatigue analysis. They met at a university mixer, started talking about crystallographic grain structures, and didn't stop talking for 4 hours. She knows about Artemis, Weirachel told me nervously before their third date. It came up. I told her everything. She said she'd read my paper. And she said anyone who turns their worst failure into a teaching tool is either brave or insane, and she was interested in figuring out which. They dated through the fall. By Thanksgiving he was bringing her home to meet the family. Sarah was sharp, funny, and clearly brilliant. She and Mom bonded over a shared love of historical fiction. She and Dad talked about metalworking. He did some amateur blacksmithing in retirement, while Weirachel and I did dishes. She's great, I told him, handing him a wet plate to dry. Yeah, he said, and he smiled the way I hadn't seen him smile in years. Yeah, she really is. Part 9, The Memorial. 2 years after Weirachel started teaching, NASA held a memorial service for the Artemis 6 crew. It was the 5th anniversary of the disaster, and the agency wanted to unveil a permanent monument at Kennedy Space Center. A sculpture of 3 figures looking toward the moon, their faces turned upward, hopeful. Weirachel was invited. So was Marcus Hale. So were the families of Park, Chen, and Tanaka. I don't know if I can go, Weirachel told me a week before the ceremony. We were hiking in the Coast Range, something he'd gotten me into during my visits to Oregon. Standing there with their families, with everyone who lost someone because of decisions I was part of. You didn't design a faulty coupling, I reminded him. You identified the flaw and tried to stop it. I didn't try hard enough. You tried as hard as the system allowed. And then you spent 5 years changing the system. He was quiet for a while, just the sound of our boots on the trail and birds in the trees. Sarah says I should go, he finally said. Says I'm still running if I don't. Sarah's right. You want to come with me? I looked at my brother, older now, some gray in his hair that hadn't been there before but stronger somehow. More solid. Like he'd been broken down and rebuilt with better materials. Yeah, I said. I'll come with you. The ceremony was beautiful and devastating. The family spoke about their loved ones. Park's wife talking about how Lisa had dreamed of the moon since she was 6 years old, Chen's father describing Robert's meticulous nature and terrible jokes, Tanaka's sister sharing stories of Yuki's infectious optimism and love of adventure. Weirachel stood with the other engineers and NASA personnel, and I watched him crying silently, not hiding it, just letting it happen. During the reception afterward, something unexpected occurred. Commander Park's wife, Dr. Emily Park, approached Weirachel. He visibly tensed and I started to move toward him, but Sarah put her hand on my arm. Wait, she whispered. Dr. Park, Weirachel said quietly. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry we couldn't. Stop, she said gently. I read your report. The original one from before the launch. NASA finally released all the investigation documents last year under FOIA requests. I read your report, and I read the communications showing it was overruled. Weirachel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. My wife believed in what she was doing, Emily continued. She knew the risks. Every astronaut does. But she also believed that the people building the equipment would do everything possible to keep her safe. You did. You identified a problem, you reported it, and you were overruled by people who should have known better. That doesn't make it okay, that. No, it doesn't. Nothing makes it okay. Lisa's gone, and our daughter is growing up without her mother, and I'm angry about that every single day. Emily's voice was steady but her eyes were fierce. But I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at a system that didn't listen when you raised concerns. And I'm grateful that you're teaching the next generation to be the kind of engineer Lisa deserved. The kind who doesn't back down when they know something's wrong. She held out her hand. Weirachel stared at it for a moment, then took it. Thank you, he managed. Don't thank me. Just keep teaching. Keep fighting. That's how you honor them. After she walked away, Weirachel turned to find Marcus Hale standing nearby. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. She's right, Hale said. About both of us. We're both responsible. We both have work to do. Yeah, Weirachel agreed. We do. That evening, standing in front of the monument as the sun set over the Atlantic, Weirachel did something I hadn't seen him do in 5 years. He talked about the future. I'm thinking about starting a foundation, he said, for engineering students who face retaliation for raising safety concerns. Legal support, financial assistance, career counseling. Make it easier for the next person to do what I tried to do. That's a great idea, Sarah said, leaning against him. Park Foundation, he said, looking up at the 3 bronze figures reaching toward the stars. Or maybe the Artemis 6 Foundation. Something that keeps their names alive in a way that matters. They'd like that, I said. And I believed it. Epilogue, 10 years later. The Artemis 6 Foundation is now a national organization. They've supported 43 engineering students who faced career consequences for raising safety concerns. 3 of those students have come back as foundation board members. 2 are teaching engineering ethics at major universities. Weirachel is a full professor now with tenure. His textbook, Engineering Ethics in Practice, Learning from Failure, is used in 180 universities worldwide. He's trained over 1,000 engineers who understand that speaking up isn't just ethically right, it's the job. He and Sarah got married 6 years ago. They have a daughter named Luna, Sarah's idea, a way to honor what Weirachel had been part of, both the triumph and the tragedy. Luna is 4 now, obsessed with how things work, constantly taking apart her toys to see what's inside. She's got your brain, I told Weirachel at her birthday party last month. God help her, he laughed. But he looked proud. Marcus Hale retired from aerospace but works part-time with the foundation. He and Weirachel aren't friends exactly, but they're partners in something important. They speak at conferences together, a cautionary tale that's become a redemption story. NASA's safety protocols have prevented 2 potential disasters in the past decade. Junior engineers identifying critical flaws and having the institutional support to stop launches until issues were resolved. Both engineers credited Weirachel's lectures, his papers, his insistence that careers matter less than lives. Our parents are in their 70s now. The awards and trophies are back on the mantle, but they're joined by different kinds of recognition. Teaching awards, humanitarian honors, a framed letter from one of Weirachel's students who said his class convinced her not to quit engineering when she faced pressure to ignore a safety flaw. I think Lisa and Robert and Yuki would be proud of what you've built, Dad told Weirachel at Christmas last year. Not happy it came at such a cost. But proud of what you made from the tragedy. Weirachel still has nightmares sometimes. Sarah says he wakes up trying to solve equations in his sleep, calculating tolerances, running stress analyses. The trauma doesn't just disappear because you've made peace with it. But he's happy. That's the truth of it. He found his way through the darkness to something that looks like joy, like purpose, like a life worth living. Last month he called me excited. NASA had asked him to consult on Artemis 14. They're finally establishing a permanent lunar base, the dream that Artemis 6 had died working toward. They want me to review all the mechanical coupling systems. Every single one. Full authority to delay the mission if I identify any concerns. He paused. They're naming the base after the Artemis 6 crew. Park Chintanaka Base. Are you going to do it? I asked. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Feels right, you know? Coming full circle. Making sure this time, when we honor their memory by continuing their mission, we do it right. You always understood how things break, I said, echoing his words from that terrible 3 a.m. phone call a decade ago. Yeah, he agreed. But I finally learned something more important. I learned how things heal. How people heal. It's not about being unbreakable. It's about knowing you'll break sometimes, accepting it, and building something beautiful from the pieces. That's pretty philosophical for an engineer. Sarah's influence. She makes me read poetry now. It's insufferable. I could hear him smiling. Love you, little brother, he said. Love you too, Wyrachel. After we hung up, I thought about the trajectory of his life. The golden boy who fell so far. The broken man who hid in a small town. The teacher who transformed his failure into wisdom for thousands of students. The consultant who would help send the next generation to the moon safely this time. Success, I realized, isn't a straight line. It's not measured in awards or salary or prestige. It's measured in what you do when everything falls apart. It's measured in whether you let your failures destroy you or define you. My brother Wyrachel had always been successful. But his greatest success wasn't designing revolutionary transmission systems or aerospace components. It was designing a second act for himself after tragedy. It was turning 3 deaths he couldn't prevent into 1,000 lives he could change. It was accepting that you can do everything right and still fail, and that the failure doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a better one.